It was just after noon when a young girl was carried into the hospital. She was pale, weak, and barely awake. Her mother held the hospital form with shaking hands. The waiting area was full of people, but inside the exam room, everything went quiet. She couldn't eat. Her legs were hurting. Her stomach was in pain. When the doctor gently touched her belly, she flinched, not from the touch, but from something deeper inside. The doctor ordered an ultrasound. What the scan showed shocked everyone. She was 20 weeks pregnant, carrying a child. When they gently asked her how this happened, who had done this to her, she whispered a name. Ravinder, her stepfather, also her uncle, the man who had lived in the house for years, who paid the bills, who kept the doors locked and the curtains closed, the man no one ever suspected. For years, this little girl had been hidden in her own home. Taken out of school, never seen outside, people said she was a little slow, but no one asked why. No one noticed she had disappeared, until her body spoke the truth. This isn't a story about a stranger hurting a young soul. This is about a girl who was hurt by someone inside her home, someone she was told to trust. And by the time anyone noticed, it was almost too late. Welcome to the crime series. Before we begin, do us a quick favor. Drop your location and the time you're watching this in the comments. We want to know where you're tuning in from, because these stories matter everywhere. Like this video, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. This is the story of Nandita. It began in the heart of Rohtak, Haryana, a town where summer heat clings to the skin and neighbors still call out to each other across rooftops. A baby entered the world in 2007. Just before the monsoon clouds rolled in, her family lived in a modest home on the outskirts of town, where brick-walled houses stood close together, and daily life moved to the rhythm of routine and tradition. She grew up alone. No siblings, no cousins nearby. Her life unfolded within a narrow radius. The rented house, the small neighborhood temple, and the occasional trip to the fruit stall on the main road. Years ago, she had been enrolled at the local government primary school. But that chapter had closed well before anyone noticed. Nandita had suffered a head injury during early childhood, after which she began showing signs of cognitive delay. Her mother described her as a little unstable and said this was why she had withdrawn her from school. There was no formal diagnosis, no medical file followed up. Just silence and absence. Her mother, Sangeeta Devi, had come to Haryana from a village in Bihar more than a decade earlier. She had no school certificate, no steady job, and no extended family nearby. But she had what most daily wage workers relied on: endurance. She worked on construction sites, carried bricks, cleaned empty flats, and scrubbed floors in unfinished buildings. She left early and returned late, often too tired to speak more than a few words. Her skin was browned by the sun, her hands calloused from concrete dust. But in the neighborhood, people respected her, not warmly, but quietly. She didn't gossip, didn't complain, and always paid her rent on time. Her first husband, Nandita's father, had died several years earlier. He had struggled with chronic alcohol use, a pattern that worsened over time and affected his ability to work regularly. Neighbors recalled seeing him loiter near the local liquor shop most evenings, sometimes unsteady on his feet, sometimes slumped by the wall. His health had deteriorated slowly, and by the time Nandita was still a toddler, he had been diagnosed with severe kidney damage. The condition progressed quickly. He died in a government hospital from kidney failure. No autopsy was conducted, no compensation followed, just a death certificate and a silence that settled over the household. The loss left Sangeeta with a child, no income and no family support, in a state far from the village she once called home. Certainly, as is common in many traditional families, especially in rural and semi-urban parts of India, a widow is often expected to remarry within her late husband's family. It's seen as a way to keep the family unit intact, protect the child, and avoid the social stigma attached to being a single mother. For Sangeeta Devi, the pressure came quietly but firmly. She had no close relatives nearby, no stable job, and no support system. People began to suggest a familiar solution: marry her brother-in-law. And so, in 2012, Sangeeta married Ravinder Sharma, her late husband's younger brother. Ravinder had never married before. He lived with his aging mother in a quiet neighborhood. He was a man of few words, the kind who avoided conversations and kept his distance at social events. Most people in the area knew of him, but very few knew anything about him. He worked as a night shift security guard at a private warehouse in Rohtak's industrial area, a job that paid modestly but regularly. When the match was proposed, some eyebrows were raised. Neighbors whispered. A few questioned the decision. After all, marrying your dead husband's brother wasn't considered ideal by everyone, even in conservative circles. But the concerns were short-lived. Both families agreed. The arrangement was legal, culturally tolerable, and, above all, practical. It was in Nandita's best interest, they said. A child needed a father figure. A woman needed a provider. After the wedding, Ravinder moved into the house where Sangeeta and Nandita lived, a small, rented space on the outskirts of town. The household now included the young girl, her mother, and her new stepfather, who was also her uncle by blood. The roles were complex, but the surface appeared simple. A family trying to start over. For Sangeeta, this new beginning brought some relief. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone in carrying the full weight of daily survival. With Ravinder contributing to expenses, she no longer had to stretch every rupee or avoid difficult questions about being a widow. His presence brought a quiet kind of respect. People stopped asking uncomfortable questions. Shopkeepers greeted her differently. Landlords didn't hesitate as much to rent. To outsiders, the home looked stable. Ravinder returned from work on time. He paid the electricity bill without being asked. He walked with Sangeeta to the market. It wasn't love, but it was structure. And for a woman who had fought every battle alone, that felt like peace. Even those who had doubted the marriage began to change their tone. He seems responsible, some said. At least he's stepping up, others added. People noticed that Nandita had a male guardian now, someone to speak up on her behalf, someone who gave the household a kind of legitimacy it had lacked since her father's death. Ravinder was still quiet. He didn't attend community gatherings. He skipped festivals and neighborhood meetings. But now those same traits were viewed differently. What was once seen as coldness was now called discipline. His silence was interpreted as focus. He's just private, people said, a no-nonsense man. In the early months, the signs were encouraging. Neighbors sometimes heard laughter from the house, short, muffled bursts that faded quickly, but were new nonetheless. Sangeeta looked less exhausted. Her shoulders drooped less. Her pace quickened. There was food on the stove, lights on in the evening, and the soft sound of a TV through the wall. Ravinder wasn't affectionate, but he was present. He did what was expected. He stayed out of trouble, and that, in the eyes of most people, was enough. The story of a struggling widow and her daughter was slowly rewritten into something more socially acceptable, a household back on its feet. But behind the closed doors, something had changed. It was quiet. Too quiet. Nandita used to be a quiet but familiar sight in the neighborhood, sitting at the doorstep, holding a broken plastic doll in her lap, softly humming songs she had memorized long ago. She didn't speak much, but people noticed her presence. She would watch the street from her corner, sometimes smiling at passing children, even if she didn't join in their games. But then she stopped appearing altogether. She hadn't gone back to school. Her name had been removed from the school's list long ago, and no teacher had come looking. Her health, already delicate because of a head injury she suffered as a small child, was no longer being monitored. There were no checkups, no reports, no follow-ups. And the little girl who once played quietly outside, watching, listening, waiting, had gone completely silent. The changes were easy to miss. The front gate stayed locked more often. The curtain in the main window was always drawn. The usual sounds of daily life, footsteps, laughter, even arguments, faded until the house felt like it had no voice at all. From the outside, everything seemed calm, too calm. But no one paid much attention. The neighbors didn't ask questions. They assumed the household had simply become more disciplined. After all, there was a man in the house now, someone with a job, someone who paid the rent. In many people's eyes, that meant stability. The mother, who had once struggled alone, was now under the protection of a husband. To some, that was a step forward. The truth was far more painful. Behind those closed doors, something was changing. Slowly, quietly. The girl who once sat at the threshold had vanished into the shadows of her own home. And no one noticed. The man's presence, steady, silent, and in control, had distracted everyone from the girl's disappearance. Then the pain began. Nandita started to complain. First, she said her legs hurt, then her stomach. At first, her mother thought it might be a common illness, but the pain didn't stop. It grew worse. Nandita became weaker each day. She slept more, cried softly at night, and refused food. She was pale and confused, unable to walk properly. Her body was giving out, and still she said very little. After several days of watching her daughter grow sicker and more withdrawn, Sangeeta finally decided to take her to the hospital. She didn't know what the doctors would find. She just knew something wasn't right. They arrived at PGIM's Rohtak shortly after noon. The hospital's outpatient department was packed with patients and noise. But Sangeeta didn't notice any of it. Her full focus was on her daughter. Nandita had grown too weak to walk, so Sangeeta carried her in her arms, one hand supporting her back, the other holding up her legs, which had started to cramp from the pain. The clock showed around 2:30 p.m. when Nandita was officially registered for medical consultation. Sangeeta gave her name at the reception counter and was directed to the pediatric wing. Nandita looked exhausted. Her eyes were dull, her face was pale, and she leaned against her mother as they waited their turn. She had been suffering from stomach pain for days. Her legs ached constantly, and in the last 2 days, her condition had worsened quickly. She was vomiting off and on, refusing food, and drifting in and out of sleep. Sangeeta told the staff she didn't know what was wrong, only that her daughter was not getting better. A junior doctor on duty examined Nandita. Her temperature was slightly above normal, her pulse weak, and she complained of pain in her lower belly. But what caught the doctor's attention was the swelling in her abdomen, something that didn't fit with the usual signs of a stomach infection or fever. Concerned, the doctor didn't waste time. He referred her immediately to the obstetrics and gynecology department, a decision that would soon reveal the real cause of Nandita's condition. There, a senior female gynecologist, assisted by a nurse, took over. She asked Sangeeta a few questions, then began a careful physical examination of Nandita. What she found made her pause. She stepped out and requested an urgent ultrasound. The scan was done a short while later by the on-call radiologist. He moved the probe gently over Nandita's small, swollen abdomen. The screen flickered, and what appeared there confirmed every unspoken fear. The scan showed something that no one had been prepared for. A living fetus, still growing inside her. Gestational age, about 20 weeks, she was pregnant. The radiologist quietly passed the report to the gynecologist, who double-checked the results. The findings were clear and alarming. She wrote her final notes, signed the report, and immediately flagged the matter as urgent and sensitive. Before we continue with this heartbreaking story, if you believe in bringing hidden truths to light and giving victims the voice they never had, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. These stories matter, and your support helps us keep telling them. Now, back to Nandita's story. The hospital followed legal protocol without delay. As required under India's Protection from Sexual Offences (POSO) Act, a medico-legal case, MLC, was registered. This meant the hospital officially informed the authorities that a child had been found pregnant and that it was likely the result of abuse. By 4:12 p.m., the District Welfare Committee, CWC, the District Protection Officer, DCPO, and the Women Police Station in Rohtak had all been alerted. The case was no longer just a medical issue. It was now a criminal investigation. Nandita was immediately admitted for protection and care. She was given her own bed in the pediatric gynecology ward. A female constable was assigned to stand guard outside her room. A counselor from the hospital staff was also asked to stay close in case Nandita needed mental health support. At 4:35 p.m., Sangeeta Devi was called into a designated private consultation room. Present were the senior gynecologist, a hospital counselor, and a representative from the welfare committee who had just arrived on site. The findings were communicated verbally, and a formal copy of the ultrasound report was handed over to her. According to the notes written by the representative from the welfare committee, CWC, Sangeeta Devi said she had no idea what was happening to Nandita. She told the officials that Nandita had not been in school for several years. She explained that she had suffered a head injury when she was very young, and ever since then, she had behaved differently, she said. Sangeeta claimed that Nandita had never shown any signs that made her think something was seriously wrong. The CWC recorded this statement and added it to the case file for the local magistrate to review. By 6 p.m., senior police officers from the Women Police Station arrived at the hospital. They reviewed medical records, the medico-legal case (MLC) report, and Sangeeta's statement. The police confirmed where the family lived, but were told not to make any arrests yet. The authorities wanted to wait until Nandita could be interviewed safely with trained counselors present before taking any major steps. The welfare committee had now taken full control of the case. They arranged for a professional team to speak with Nandita in a calm, protected setting, one that wouldn't scare or pressure her. The first interview with her was scheduled for the next morning. As day one came to a close, Nandita remained under medical care at PGIMs. A formal case file had been created. It included her name, age, the ultrasound report, and her mother's initial statement. The file was now officially active and sealed for further investigation. But the news didn't stay quiet for long. By early evening, the hospital's report had reached the highest officials at both the District Welfare Committee and the Women Police Station. The documents were clear. The pregnancy had been confirmed by 2 separate doctors. There was no confusion, no doubt, about what the scan showed. The file now had stamps from 3 different authorities: medical, legal, and administrative. Everything had been done according to hospital protocol. The doctors had followed the rules. The case had been properly logged. The right people had been notified. But even with procedures in place, something about this case felt different. It wasn't just another file. The CWC recommended a formal interview with the patient to be conducted at the hospital in the presence of a trained child counselor. Until then, no officer was permitted to directly question or interact with her. Procedures were followed carefully. Security outside the ward was increased. The location of the family's residence, a rental property on the city's outer fringe, was verified by local officers. An informal patrol was set up in the vicinity. No uniformed personnel were deployed to the home at that stage. The risk of alerting other residents was noted. The file had now reached senior officers, who instructed all personnel to proceed with caution. There was a growing concern within the response team, not because the hospital's findings were unclear, but because time was a factor. Any delay in identifying and securing the household could compromise evidence. The living conditions of the individual named as the child's guardian had not yet been evaluated. The person's movements were unmonitored. There was no warrant issued, and no one yet had a sworn statement from the patient. Internally, officers shared the same quiet concern. If anyone within the home learned the extent of what had been discovered at PGIMs, there was a risk the story might change or disappear. Within 24 hours, that risk would be tested. The next morning, under legal supervision, the patient would be asked to name the person responsible. And this time, someone would be listening. The formal session was scheduled the following morning. By 10 a.m., a trained counselor from the District Welfare Committee arrived at the ward. She was accompanied by a representative from the District Protection Unit and a female officer from the Women Police Station. A senior staff nurse remained present as a medical observer. No uniformed male personnel were permitted entry into the room. The approach was designed to minimize pressure. There would be no direct questioning, only a quiet effort to allow Nandita to speak in her own time. Her answers, at first, were short. She responded to her name. She nodded when asked about her pain. But when the topic shifted to the reason for her condition, she went silent. The counselor did not push. The objective was not to interrogate, but to observe. A second attempt was made 45 minutes later, after a short break and with the nurse seated beside her. This time she responded, slowly and without detail. She said she had been warned not to say anything. She did not say who had warned her. The counselor noted her hesitation, posture, and tone. Everything was recorded in the CWC observation sheet. By early afternoon, the third interaction was attempted. It was during this exchange, after repeated reassurance that no harm would come to her, that she spoke clearly. She identified the man who had been living in their house for several years. She referred to him by name. Ravinder. She stated that he had warned her not to speak, and the abuse was something that had happened over time and wasn't a one-time occurrence. The statement was taken down in the presence of all assigned personnel. It was filed and sealed by the Child Welfare Committee for handover to the police station. No other details were asked of her that day. The Women Police Station, upon receiving the file, activated a pre-drafted plan to locate and detain the named individual. A team of plainclothes officers was dispatched to the residence that evening. Surveillance had already confirmed that Ravinder was home. Officers approached the house without announcing their presence. The door was opened without incident. Ravinder did not resist. He was taken into custody at 7:45 p.m. and transported to the station for preliminary questioning. The arrest was logged under sections related to unlawful behavior involving a minor and custodial misconduct under applicable legal codes. At the station, Ravinder denied all allegations. He claimed that the entire matter was a fabrication designed to discredit him and remove him from the household. He suggested that property disputes may have been a factor. He referred to the girl as someone with limited understanding and claimed she may have been coached to give a statement. Officers recorded his responses. No counter-questioning was conducted at that stage. A medical examination was ordered and carried out at a separate facility under standard custodial procedures. A DNA sample was collected under legal warrant. Chain of custody was established by forensic personnel. The sample was sealed and transferred to the State Forensic Science Laboratory for processing. Following the arrest, the investigation entered a critical phase. With the preliminary statement recorded and the suspect in custody, attention shifted to the verification process. The priority was now evidence, clinical, physical, and testimonial, that could either substantiate or challenge the allegation made at PGIMs. The DNA sample collected from the accused was forwarded to the State Forensic Science Laboratory, FSL. The sample had been obtained under legal warrant, witnessed by law enforcement, and documented on official chain of custody forms. While biological analysis was underway, the Protection Unit scheduled a basic psychological evaluation. A certified psychologist met with the patient over 2 short sessions inside the hospital ward. The objective was not to interrogate, but to assess her ability to understand and respond to questions, recall information, and identify individuals in her environment. Meanwhile, law enforcement collected witness accounts from individuals associated with the household. Neighbors were interviewed discreetly. A local shopkeeper confirmed seeing the accused regularly near the premises, but stated he had never heard or seen anything unusual. A landlord was contacted but provided limited insight, citing irregular rent payments but no complaints or incidents. These statements were included in the police file for context, though none constituted direct evidence. When the physical and medical evidence was formally entered into the judicial record, the groundwork was complete. The case would move from collection to argument, from examination to testimony. The case entered the public domain just over a week after the arrest. Details first appeared in a 2-column report published in a regional daily, tucked below the fold on the crime page. The language was cautious. It mentioned a medical discovery at PGIM's Rotak, an ongoing investigation involving a family member, and court-directed protective custody for Nandita, who had been hospitalized. Inside the hospital, Nandita remained under medical care, shielded from media coverage and public noise. Officials kept her location restricted. Her name did not appear in any official press release. Court orders reaffirmed the ban on identifying details. But outside, the discussion had already started. Not just about one case, but about the systems that allowed it to happen. While the public response continued to build across newsrooms and digital platforms, the focus of the investigation returned to the family at the center of the case. With the accused in custody and Nandita placed under government protection, the attention shifted to her mother. In her statement, Sangeeta repeated what she had said at the hospital. She claimed she had not known about her daughter's condition and was unaware of any activity in the home that would have indicated wrongdoing. She stated that Nandita had experienced a fall during early childhood, resulting in a head injury. According to her, the child had not returned to school since then and exhibited behavior that she described as slow or inconsistent. She provided no hospital documentation to verify the injury or any developmental diagnosis. When asked why no medical follow-up or re-enrollment in school had occurred, Sangeeta gave no specific answer. Later in the same interview, she made an unusual request. According to the CWC meeting log, Sangeeta asked whether the police might consider releasing the accused. When questioned about this request, she said that she had no support system and didn't see life without a man. She described Ravinder as someone who provided, and said that despite what had happened, she believed the matter could be settled within the family. She added that, in her view, the situation was not beyond forgiveness. The committee members documented her responses without interruption. No recommendations were made at that time, but the remarks were forwarded to the district court and shared with the Department of Women and Development for review. Internal discussions began on the suitability of the mother retaining future custody. Outside the formal record, professionals involved in the case began expressing quiet concern. Among investigators and legal observers, questions were raised, not just about what had happened, but about what might have been overlooked or ignored inside the household. Her consistent focus on Nandita's supposed limitations, repeated in multiple conversations, stood in contrast to Nandita's own testimony. By that point, Nandita had been interviewed twice by court-appointed counselors. In both sessions, she had been coherent, responsive, and able to answer direct questions with clarity. She recalled names, locations, and time sequences. She described warnings she had received and how those threats kept her from speaking earlier. Her statements were consistent and legally admissible. In light of these records, some within the protection framework began to question whether the mother's emphasis on cognitive delay was an attempt to shift attention away from her own role, either through neglect, indifference, or something more deliberate. No official declaration was made regarding her complicity, but the tone of discussion had shifted. A review of household history was ordered. The government team began preparing recommendations about future placement for Nandita, based not only on safety, but also on the question of trust. With the investigation underway and the accused in custody, a new matter emerged, one that required both medical precision and legal clarity. The scan conducted during Nandita's admission had placed the gestational age at approximately 20 weeks. Under existing medical law, the upper limit for pregnancy termination without special approval stood at 20 weeks, as per provisions under the Medical Termination of Pregnancy (MTP) Act, with further relaxation only possible under specific medical or judicial exemptions. In this case, the decision could not be made by a single practitioner. On recommendation from the PGIM's gynecology unit, a medical board was constituted. It comprised 5 members: a senior obstetrician, a pediatrician, a psychiatrist, a forensic medical examiner, and the hospital's legal advisor. The board was tasked with assessing both the physical risk and the legal framework surrounding the continuation of the pregnancy. The panel reviewed the patient's complete case file, including imaging reports, laboratory findings, psychological assessments, and sworn statements from the medical staff involved in her initial treatment. Multiple specialists examined Nandita over the course of 48 hours. Their objective was not only to evaluate current medical status, but also to determine whether carrying the pregnancy to term would pose significant harm to her health. On the third day, the board submitted its findings in writing. The report stated that continuing the pregnancy would likely endanger her physical well-being. It also noted that the psychological toll, given her age, medical history, and lack of familial stability, would be severe and long-lasting. The court granted permission for the procedure to be carried out at PGMs, under the direct supervision of senior medical personnel and in the presence of a government-appointed observer. Hospital staff began immediate preparations. The procedure was completed without complications. Post-operative observation was conducted in the pediatric wing, and vital signs were monitored round the clock for the next 72 hours. During this time, Nandita remained under hospital care. She was visited daily by a counselor and examined periodically by attending nurses. Her location and condition were withheld from all outside parties, including members of her extended family. No contact requests were approved. The court order, hospital report, and termination certificate were all sealed and submitted to the investigating authorities as part of the ongoing case file. The medical procedure marked a turning point, not only in the course of her physical recovery, but also in how the case would proceed in court. Nandita was discharged from PGIMs under escort and relocated to a state-run child care institution operating under the Juvenile Justice Act. The name and district of the facility were withheld from the public. All transportation was arranged without media disclosure. No contact was permitted between Nandita and her biological family during the transfer. Meanwhile, the legal case moved forward. Based on the hospital's medical records, sworn statements, and the accused's own custodial files, charges were framed under multiple sections of the Indian Penal Code. The case was assigned to a special fast-track court established for PHOSO matters in Rohtak. Proceedings were initiated under in-camera conditions. The courtroom remained closed to media and the general public. During the trial, the prosecution presented the chain of evidence in full. Sangeeta was summoned to testify as a material witness. During her appearance, she reaffirmed her previous statements, that she had no knowledge of what had occurred and that her daughter had not disclosed anything to her. She reiterated her claims about past medical issues affecting the child's communication. Her testimony was received without comment by the bench. The defense strategy centered on undermining the credibility of the Nandita's testimony. Counsel argued that she lacked clarity, was vulnerable to suggestion, and may have confused timelines or events. However, the court noted that her responses during both the CWC session and counseling evaluations had remained consistent. There were no signs of coached testimony, and her identification of the accused had occurred without external prompting. On the final day of trial, the judge reviewed the evidence in open court. In his oral summary, he noted the strength of the forensic evidence, the corroboration provided by medical documentation, and the weight of the witness testimonies. He emphasized that the individual in question had occupied a position of responsibility within the household and had breached that position in a manner that could not be dismissed. The court found Ravinder Kumar guilty on all primary counts. The judge described the act as an egregious betrayal of trust within the home, and noted that the legal protections offered under the POCSO Act were designed precisely to address such breaches. He sentenced the accused to rigorous imprisonment under the relevant sections of the Act, with the terms to be served consecutively rather than concurrently. Ravinder Sharma was found guilty on all major charges under the POCSO Act and relevant sections of the Indian Penal Code. The judge ruled that the evidence, including medical records, DNA confirmation, Psychological assessments and the child's consistent testimony left no room for doubt. The court sentenced him to 20 years of rigorous imprisonment for aggravated assault under Section 6 of the PIHOSO Act. An additional 5 years was added under Section 506 of the IPC for criminal intimidation of a minor. These sentences were to be served consecutively, not concurrently, meaning Ravender would serve a total of 25 years behind bars without parole. In his remarks, the judge called the crime an egregious betrayal of trust committed within the walls of a home, and emphasized that the victim was vulnerable, isolated, and silenced in her own household. The bench stated that the sentence was meant not only to punish the offender, but also to send a message that abuse committed under the cover of family will not be treated lightly. Nandita's story is a painful reminder that silence can be deadly, and that sometimes the people we trust most can cause the deepest harm. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe in truth, justice, and giving a voice to the unheard, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that needs to be told.